Marcus Thompson had always been the kind of person who thought rules didn't apply to him. At 32 years old, he owned a small restaurant in downtown Chicago and believed his success gave him the right to act however he pleased. His friends often warned him that his attitude would get him into serious trouble one day, but Marcus just laughed it off. On a crisp Tuesday morning in October, Marcus decided to take his first trip to London. He had saved money for months to visit the famous landmarks he had only seen in movies. The flight was long and uncomfortable, and by the time he arrived at Heathrow Airport, Marcus was already in a foul mood. The customs line was endless. The weather was cold and rainy, and nothing seemed to be going according to his carefully planned itinerary. After checking into his hotel near Westminster, Marcus grabbed his camera and headed straight to Buckingham Palace. He had heard so much about the famous guards in their red uniforms and tall black hats. As a restaurant owner, Marcus always carried a small bottle of his signature hot sauce in his jacket pocket. It was his pride and joy, a secret blend of peppers that he claimed could wake the dead. The palace grounds were crowded with tourists from all over the world. Children pressed their faces against the iron gates, while parents snapped countless photos. Marcus pushed through the crowd, determined to get the perfect shot of the royal guards. He had promised his social media followers something spectacular from his London trip. Standing at attention, near the main entrance was Guard William Hayes, a 24-year-old soldier who had served at the palace for 3 years. William took his duty seriously and had never broken character during his shifts, no matter what tourists tried to do to get his attention. He had seen it all. People making silly faces, trying to touch his uniform, shouting jokes, and even attempting to take selfies with him. Through it all, William remained perfectly still, his face showing no emotion. Marcus watched William for several minutes, growing frustrated that the guard wouldn't react to anything the tourists were doing. In Marcus's mind, this was just another person who needed to be taught a lesson about customer service. After all, these guards were essentially performers for the tourists, weren't they? The crowd around the gate began to thin as people moved on to other attractions. Marcus saw his opportunity and approached William directly. He started by making loud comments about the guard's uniform, then moved closer and began waving his hands in front of William's face. The guard remained motionless, staring straight ahead as he had been trained to do. Marcus felt his temper rising. In his restaurant, when employees ignored customers, there were consequences. He couldn't understand why this guard thought he was so special that he could simply ignore paying tourists. The arrogance reminded Marcus of a rude waiter he had once fired on the spot. Without thinking clearly, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his bottle of hot sauce. The liquid inside was a dangerous mix of ghost peppers, Carolina Reapers, and several other extremely spicy ingredients. Marcus had developed it to be one of the hottest sauces in Chicago, something that would make even the toughest customers beg for milk. In a moment of pure stupidity, Marcus unscrewed the eye cap and threw the contents directly at William's face. The bright red sauce splattered across the guard's black bearskin hat, dripped down his face, and stained his pristine red uniform. The burning liquid immediately began to sting William's eyes and skin. For just a moment, the area around the palace gate fell completely silent. Other tourists stopped what they were doing and stared in shock at what had just happened. Marcus stood there with the empty bottle in his hand, suddenly realizing that everyone was looking at him with expressions of horror and disbelief. William, S training had prepared him for many situations, but not for having industrial-strength hot sauce thrown in his face. His eyes began to water uncontrollably, and the burning sensation spread across his skin like fire. Despite the intense pain, his first instinct was still to maintain his position, but the chemicals in the sauce were too strong to ignore. The silence was broken by the sound of multiple whistles blowing at once. Palace security guards appeared from seemingly nowhere, moving quickly toward Marcus and the scene of the attack. Tourists began pulling out their phones to record what was happening, sensing that they were witnessing something that would definitely make the news. Marcus looked around at the gathering crowd and the approaching security officers. For the first time since arriving in London, he began to understand that he might have made a serious mistake. The empty hot sauce bottle in his hand suddenly felt incredibly heavy, and his heart started beating faster as he realized there was nowhere to run. The next few seconds seemed to move in slow motion as uniformed officers surrounded him from all directions. Marcus could hear people in the crowd using words like assault and arrest, while others were already posting videos to social media. His perfect London vacation was about to become something very different than what he had planned. As the first security officer reached for his arm, Marcus finally understood that attacking a royal guard was not the same as yelling at an employee in his restaurant. The rules he had spent his life ignoring were about to catch up with him in a very serious way, and there would be no talking his way out of this situation. The first security officer to reach Marcus was Sergeant David Collins, a veteran with 15 years of experience protecting the royal family. David had seen his share of unusual incidents, but someone attacking a guard with hot sauce was definitely a first. He grabbed Marcus firmly by the arm while two other officers moved to assist the injured guard. Marcus tried to pull away, but David's grip was like iron. "Sir, you need to come with us right now," David said in a voice that left no room for argument. Marcus looked around desperately, hoping to find some escape route, but security officers had formed a complete circle around him. Meanwhile, Guard William Hayes was struggling with the burning effects of the hot sauce. His eyes were streaming tears, and the skin on his face felt like it was on fire. A medical officer rushed over with bottled water and began flushing William's eyes while other guards helped him away from his post. The sight of the stoic guard being led away in obvious pain made several tourists gasp and point. As Marcus was being handcuffed, he finally found his voice. "Wait, this is just a misunderstanding," he shouted. "I'm an American tourist. I own a restaurant. This is all just a big mistake." But his protests fell on deaf ears as the officers began walking him toward a security building on the palace grounds. The crowd of tourists had grown larger, with people pushing forward to get better views and photos of the arrest. Marcus could hear multiple languages being spoken as international visitors tried to understand what they had witnessed. Several people were already live streaming the incident on their phones, broadcasting Marcus's walk of shame to viewers around the world. Inside the security building, Marcus was placed in a small, windowless room with nothing but a metal table and 2 chairs. The reality of his situation began to sink in as he sat alone, still handcuffed, staring at the bare walls. This wasn't like the movies where the charming American tourist gets a slap on the wrist and a funny story to tell back. Sergeant Collins entered the room with a clipboard and a very serious expression. "Mr. Thompson, you are under arrest for assault on a royal guard," he began, reading from an official document. "You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say may be used against you in court. You have the right to legal representation." Marcus interrupted frantically. "Look, officer, I think you're making this way bigger than it needs to be. It was just hot sauce. I didn't hurt anybody. In America, this would maybe be a small fine or something. Can't we just work this out?" David looked up from his clipboard with an expression that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Mr. Thompson, you assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard while they were performing their official duties. This is not America, and hot sauce or not, what you did is considered a serious criminal offense in the United Kingdom." The word criminal hit Marcus like a physical blow. In all his years of acting like rules didn't apply to him, he had never actually been arrested for anything more serious than a parking ticket. The idea that he could actually go to prison in a foreign country had never occurred to him when he grabbed that bottle of hot sauce. David continued explaining the charges while Marcus's mind raced. "The guard you attacked, William Hayes, has been taken to the hospital for treatment. Depending on the severity of his injuries, you could be facing charges of actual bodily harm in addition to the assault charges." Hospital? Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had convinced himself that the hot sauce incident was just a prank gone wrong, but the idea that William might be seriously injured made everything feel much more real and terrifying. "I want to call the American embassy," Marcus said, his voice much smaller than before. "I have rights as an American citizen." "You do," David agreed, "and we will contact the embassy for you. But Mr. Thompson, I need you to understand something very clearly. The embassy cannot get you out of this. They can provide you with legal assistance and ensure you're treated fairly, but you will face the full consequences of British law for your actions." While Marcus sat in the security room trying to process what was happening to him, News of the incident was already spreading across social media. Multiple videos of the attack and arrest had been posted online, and news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. The headline, "American Tourist Attacks Royal Guard with Hot Sauce," was trending on Twitter. Within an hour of the incident, back at the hospital, William Hayes was being treated for chemical burns to his eyes and face. The doctors were flushing his eyes with specialized solutions and applying cooling treatments to his skin. William was in significant pain, but he was more concerned about missing his duty shift than his own injuries. "I've never seen anything like this," one of the emergency room doctors told a nurse. "The capsaicin levels in whatever hit this young man must be extremely high. We're looking at potential permanent damage to his vision if we don't get this treated properly." The word, permanent, would have made Marcus feel sick if he had heard it, but he was still sitting in the security room, focused on his own problems. He was starting to realize that his impulsive decision to throw hot sauce at a guard might have consequences that would follow him for the rest of his life. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus watched through a small window as normal tourist activities continued around the palace. People were taking photos, buying souvenirs, and enjoying their London vacations exactly as he had planned to do just a few hours earlier. The contrast between their freedom and his confinement was almost unbearable. When David returned with an update, his expression was even more serious than before. "Mr. Thompson, I've just received word from the hospital. Guard Hayes has suffered chemical burns to his corneas. The doctors are still determining whether there will be permanent vision damage." Marcus felt the room spinning around him as the full weight of what he had done finally hit him. This wasn't a prank anymore. This wasn't something he could laugh off or pay his way out of. He had potentially blinded a young man who was just doing his job, and now he was going to face the consequences in a foreign legal system that he knew nothing about. The transfer to the police station was a nightmare Marcus would never forget. Photographers and news crews had somehow learned about the incident and were waiting outside the palace gates. As the police van pulled away, Marcus could see reporters speaking rapidly into cameras while pointing in his direction. The flashing lights from dozens of cameras turned the short journey into a media circus. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell was waiting at Belgravia Police Station when Marcus arrived. Sarah had handled cases involving attacks on royal guards before, but nothing quite like this. She was a 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police, known for her no-nonsense approach to dealing with tourists who thought British laws didn't apply to them. Marcus was processed like any other criminal suspect. His fingerprints were taken, his photo was captured from multiple angles, and his personal belongings were confiscated and catalogued. The reality of being treated like a common criminal was devastating for someone who had always seen himself as successful and respectable. "I run a business back home," Marcus kept repeating to anyone who would listen. "I employ 12 people, I pay my taxes. I've never been in trouble with the law before. This is all just a huge misunderstanding." But Detective Inspector Mitchell had heard similar protests countless times. "Mr. Thompson," she said firmly, "whether this is your first offense or your 50th, you assaulted a member of Her Majesty's forces while they were performing their official duties. The law doesn't care about your business or your previous record." The interview room at the police station was even smaller and more intimidating than the one at the palace. Marcus sat across from Detective Mitchell while a recording device captured every word. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus felt completely powerless and out of control. "Tell me exactly what happened at Buckingham Palace today," Sarah began. Her pen poised over a notepad. Marcus tried to explain his actions in a way that would make them seem less serious. "I was just trying to get the guards' attention for a photo. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. The hot sauce was supposed to be funny, like a harmless prank." Sarah looked up from her notes with an expression that made Marcus's explanation sound even more foolish than it already was. "Mr. Thompson, you threw a chemical irritant at a serving member of the military. How exactly did you expect that to be funny?" The question hung in the air as Marcus realized he had no good answer. The truth was that he hadn't thought about consequences at all. He had acted on impulse and anger, and now he was sitting in a British police station trying to explain the unexplainable. "The guard you attacked, William Hayes, is 24 years old," Sarah continued. He's been serving his country with honor for 3 years. He was doing exactly what he was trained to do, and you assaulted him because he wouldn't break protocol to entertain you. Each word felt like a physical blow to Marcus. He had spent so many years thinking of service workers as people who existed to make his life easier that he had never considered them as real individuals with their own lives and families. While Marcus was being questioned, the story was exploding across international news networks. CNN, BBC, Fox News, and dozens of other outlets were running the story with headlines like "American Restaurant Owner Attacks Royal Guard" and "Hot Sauce Assault Shocks London Tourists." Marcus's restaurant back in Chicago was being flooded with angry phone calls and negative online reviews. His staff had no idea how to handle the situation as reporters showed up asking for interviews about their boss's character. The business Marcus had worked years to build was crumbling in real time, while he sat helpless in a London jail cell. The American embassy had been contacted, and Consul General Patricia Williams was reviewing Marcus's case. Patricia had dealt with American citizens in legal trouble overseas for 15 years, but she was already predicting that this case would be particularly difficult. "The video footage is very clear," Patricia explained to her assistant. "There's no question about what happened, and the British authorities are taking this very seriously. The best we can do is ensure he gets fair legal representation and proper treatment while he's in custody." Back at the hospital, William Hayes was receiving updates about his condition from Dr. Elizabeth Carson, one of London's leading eye specialists. The news was better than initially feared, but still serious. "The good news is that we don't believe there will be permanent blindness," Dr. Carson explained. "However, you're looking at several weeks of recovery and there may be some lasting sensitivity to light. The chemical burns were quite severe." William nodded quietly, trying to process the information. His parents were flying in from Scotland, and he would have to explain to them how a routine day of guard duty had turned into a hospital stay. More than the physical pain, William was struggling with the emotional impact of being attacked while simply doing his job. "Will I be able to return to duty?" William asked, voicing his biggest concern. Dr. Carson hesitated before answering. "That will depend on how well you heal and whether you experience any lasting effects. We'll need to monitor your progress over the next several weeks before making that determination." Meanwhile, Marcus was learning about the British legal system from his court-appointed solicitor, James Whitmore. James had practiced criminal law for 25 years and was known for his direct communication style with clients who were in denial about their situations. "Mr. Thompson, you need to understand the seriousness of your position," James explained during their first meeting. "You're facing charges of assault and actual bodily harm. If convicted, you could be looking at up to 5 years in prison." 5 years. The number hit Marcus like a truck. 5 years in a British prison, away from his business, his friends, his entire life. 5 years because of 11 minutes of stupidity outside Buckingham Palace. "But I'm American," Marcus protested weakly. "Can't they just deport me and ban me from coming back?" James shook his head. "Mr. Thompson, you committed a serious crime on British soil. You'll serve any sentence here in a British prison. Deportation only happens after you complete your sentence, assuming you receive one." As the reality of his situation continued to sink in, Marcus began to understand that his actions had consequences that extended far beyond himself. William. Hayes was in the hospital because of him. His employees back home might lose their jobs if his restaurant failed. His own life was potentially ruined because he couldn't control his temper for 11 crucial minutes. The weight of genuine regret was beginning to settle on Marcus's shoulders, but he was starting to realize that regret might not be enough to undo the damage he had caused. Marcus spent his first night in a British jail cell staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The thin mattress and scratchy blanket were nothing compared to the constant noise of other inmates and the harsh fluorescent lights that never seemed to turn completely off. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw William Hayes's face covered in hot sauce, and the guilt made his stomach twist into knots. The next morning brought a breakfast of weak tea, cold toast, and what appeared to be scrambled eggs but tasted like rubber. Marcus, who had spent years critiquing restaurant food, couldn't force himself to eat more than a few bites. The reality of potentially spending years eating meals like this was almost too much to bear. His solicitor, James Whitmore, arrived at 9 a.m. with updates that made Marcus feel even worse. "The story has gone international," James reported grimly. "It's on every major news network in America, and the British press is having a field day. The Daily Mail is calling you the hot sauce bandit, and social media is not being kind." James showed Marcus's phone, where Twitter was filled with angry comments about the attack. Americans were embarrassed by his behavior, British citizens were outraged at the assault on their guard, and people worldwide were sharing the video with commentary that ranged from disgusted to furious. "My restaurant?" Marcus asked weakly. "Have you heard anything about my restaurant?" James's expression grew even more serious. "I'm afraid the news isn't good there either. Your staff has been dealing with protesters outside the building. Several customers have canceled large catering orders, and Yelp has had to temporarily disable reviews because of the volume of negative comments." Marcus put his head in his hands as the full scope of the destruction began to sink in. His life's work was being destroyed because of 11 minutes of uncontrolled anger. Everything he had built over the past 8 years was crumbling, while he sat powerless in a foreign jail cell. At the hospital, William Hayes was receiving his first visitors since the attack. His parents, Robert and Margaret Hayes, had driven through the night from Edinburgh after receiving the shocking phone call about their son's injury. "How could someone do something like this?" Margaret asked through tears as she looked at her son's bandaged face. "You were just doing your job, standing there protecting the palace." Robert Hayes, a retired construction worker, was struggling with his own anger toward Marcus. "If I ever get my hands on that American tourist," he muttered, but William quickly interrupted. "Dad, being angry won't help anything," William said quietly. "What happened, happened. I just want to focus on getting better and hopefully returning to my duties." The Hayes family's dignity and grace under pressure stood in stark contrast to Marcus's behavior. While Marcus had spent years believing that his success gave him the right to treat others poorly, the Hayes family was responding to genuine tragedy with strength and compassion. Dr. Carson arrived with William's latest test results, bringing mixed news. "The chemical burns are healing better than we initially hoped," she explained. "However, you're going to need specialized eye drops for several months, and will need to monitor for any long-term complications." Meanwhile, the story was taking on a life of its own in the media. News programs were running segments about American tourists behaving badly overseas, using Marcus's case as an example of what not to do when visiting foreign countries. Travel experts were being interviewed about cultural sensitivity and respecting local customs. Marcus' business partner, David Chen, was trying to manage the crisis from Chicago. David had been Marcus's friend since college and had invested his life savings in the restaurant. Now he was watching everything they had built together fall apart in real time. "I've been getting calls from suppliers wanting immediate payment," David told their accountant over the phone. "3 of our biggest corporate clients have canceled their contracts. The bank is asking questions about our loan. I don't know how much longer we can keep the doors open." The 12 employees at Marcus's restaurant were facing an uncertain future. Many of them had families to support and couldn't afford to lose their jobs. The ripple effects of Marcus's actions were spreading far beyond what he could have imagined during those 11 minutes of rage. Back in London, James Whitmore was working to prepare Marcus's defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple tourist videos showed the attack from different angles. Security cameras had captured everything in high definition, and dozens of witnesses could testify about what they had seen. "The Crown Prosecution Service is taking a very hard line on this case," James explained during their afternoon meeting. "They want to make an example of you to deter other tourists from similar behavior." Marcus was beginning to understand that his American citizenship and successful business background weren't going to save him from the consequences of his actions. British law applied equally to everyone regardless of nationality or social status. "What are my realistic options?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. James consulted his notes before answering. "Your best hope is to plead guilty and show genuine remorse. If we can demonstrate that you understand the severity of your actions and are committed to making amends, the judge might be more lenient with sentencing." The word sentencing made Marcus's blood run cold. Just 3 days earlier, he had been planning to visit the Tower of London and take photos with the crown jewels. Now he was discussing plea bargains and prison sentences with a criminal defense attorney. "There's something else you need to know," James continued. "Guard Hayes has been receiving messages of support from around the world. The story has generated sympathy for him and anger toward you. The public sentiment is very much against you right now." Marcus nodded numbly, no longer surprised by bad news. He was starting to realize that his 11 minutes of stupidity had created a situation that would define the rest of his life. The successful restaurant owner who thought rules didn't apply to him was gone, replaced by a criminal defendant facing years in prison. That evening, alone in his cell, Marcus finally began to confront the real consequences of his actions. William Hayes was suffering because of him. His employees might lose their jobs because of him. His business partner's investment was at risk because of him. And for what? Because a guard wouldn't break protocol to pose for a tourist photo? For the first time since the attack, Marcus began to feel something deeper than self-pity. He was beginning to experience genuine shame and regret for what he had done to an innocent young man who was simply trying to do his job with honor and dignity. A week after the attack, Marcus was brought to Westminster Magistrates' Court for his first official hearing. The building was surrounded by journalists and protesters holding signs that read, "Respect our guards," and "Justice for William Hayes." Marcus had to be escorted through a back entrance to avoid the hostile crowd. Inside the courtroom, Marcus got his first glimpse of the formal British legal system in action. The magistrate, Judge Patricia Thornton, was a stern woman in her 50s, who had presided over hundreds of assault cases during her career. She looked at Marcus with the expression of someone who had seen every excuse and sob story imaginable. "Mr. Marcus Thompson," Judge Thornton began, reading from the charges, "you are accused of assault occasioning actual bodily harm against William Hayes, a serving member of Her Majesty's Guard, while he was performing his official duties at Buckingham Palace." The prosecutor, Crown Attorney Michael Bradford, presented the case against Marcus with clinical precision. He showed the court multiple video angles of the attack, medical reports detailing William's injuries, and witness statements from tourists who had seen the entire incident. "Your Honor," Bradford stated, "this was not a moment of poor judgment, or a harmless prank gone wrong. The defendant deliberately threw a chemical irritant at a serving member of our military, because he was frustrated that the guard would not break protocol to entertain him." Marcus listened as his own actions were described in legal terminology that made them sound even worse than he remembered. Words like premeditated, assault, and chemical weapon filled the courtroom, each one feeling like a nail in his coffin. James Whitmore did his best to present Marcus in a sympathetic light. "Your Honor, my client is a successful business owner with no prior criminal record. He deeply regrets his actions and is prepared to accept full responsibility for his behavior." But Judge Thornton had heard enough similar cases to know that remorse after getting caught wasn't the same as genuine character change. "Mr. Thompson," she said directly to Marcus, "do you understand that your actions could have caused permanent blindness to a young man who was simply doing his duty to serve his country?" Marcus stood up shakily and tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "Yes, Your Honor," he finally managed. "I understand, and I'm truly sorry. Sorry doesn't restore damaged vision or erase trauma," Judge Thornton replied sharply. "Your case will proceed to Crown Court for full trial. Until then, you will remain in custody without bail." The gavel came down with a sound that echoed through Marcus's soul. No bail meant he would be staying in jail until his trial, which could be months away. As he was led back to his cell, Marcus caught a glimpse of William Hayes sitting in the gallery with his parents. William was wearing dark sunglasses to protect his healing eyes, and his face still showed signs of the chemical burns. But what struck Marcus most was the dignity with which William carried himself. Even after being attacked and injured, the young guard maintained the same composure and honor that had made him such a good soldier. Back in Chicago, the situation was getting worse for everyone connected to Marcus's restaurant. David Chen had been forced to lay off 6 employees and was considering closing the business permanently. The remaining staff was working for reduced hours while David tried to figure out how to salvage something from the disaster. "I keep thinking about how this all started," David told his wife that evening. "Marcus threw hot sauce at a guard because he was angry about not getting a photo. Now 12 families might lose their income because of those 11 minutes." The local Chicago news had picked up the story, interviewing former employees and customers about Marcus's character. The picture that emerged was of someone who had always been demanding and difficult, but who no one had expected to commit a violent crime. "He was always yelling at staff about something," one former server told the reporter. "We used to joke that he treated the restaurant like his personal kingdom, but none of us thought he would actually hurt someone." Meanwhile, William Hayes was slowly recovering at his parents' home in Edinburgh. The doctors had cleared him to leave the hospital, but he still needed daily eye treatments and checkups. The physical healing was progressing, but the emotional impact was proving more difficult to overcome. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if that chemical had been even stronger," William confided to his father during one of their long conversations. "What if I had been permanently blinded? What if I can never return to service?" Robert Hayes looked at his son with immense pride. "William, you served your country with honor, and some fool tourist attacked you for it. That's not a reflection on you or your service, that's entirely on him." The story had generated an unexpected outpouring of support for William from around the world. Letters were arriving daily from military personnel, veterans, and ordinary citizens, expressing their appreciation for his service and their outrage at the attack. A crowdfunding campaign to help with his medical expenses had raised over £50,000 in just 1 week. Back in his London jail cell, Marcus was finally receiving some of these letters and news reports through his solicitor. Reading about the impact of his actions on William and the global response to the story was devastating. One letter particularly affected him. It was from a retired American veteran who had served in Vietnam. "Mr. Thompson, as an American, I am ashamed of your behavior. That young man was serving his country with honor, something you clearly know nothing about. You have disgraced not only yourself but every American who travels abroad." Marcus folded the letter carefully and put it with the growing pile of similar messages. For the first time in his life, he was truly confronting the consequences of his actions and the person he had become. The successful businessman who thought rules didn't apply to him was facing the reality that his behavior had real victims and serious consequences. James Whitmore visited with updates on the legal proceedings. "The Crown is pushing for the maximum sentence," he reported. "They want to send a strong message about attacks on military personnel. We're looking at a minimum of 2 years in prison, possibly up to 5 depending on the judge. 2 to 5 years." Marcus tried to imagine what his life would look like after spending that long in prison. His restaurant would be gone, his reputation destroyed, his savings depleted by legal fees. He would emerge as a middle-aged ex-convict with nothing to show for his previous success. But more than his own future, Marcus was beginning to understand the lasting impact on William Hayes. The young guard's military career might be over because of injuries sustained in Marcus's attack. A promising young man's life had been altered forever, because Marcus couldn't control his temper for 11 crucial minutes. As he lay on his thin mattress that night, Marcus finally began to feel the full weight of genuine remorse. It wasn't just regret for getting caught or fear of punishment. It was true sorrow for the pain he had caused to an innocent person and the ripple effects that were still spreading outward from his moment of stupidity. 3 months after the attack, Marcus stood in the dock at the Old Bailey, London's most famous criminal court. The historic courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case. In the gallery, William Hayes sat with his parents, his recovery nearly complete but his future still uncertain. Judge Harrison Blackwood, one of Britain's most respected criminal court judges, presided over the proceedings. He had reviewed all the evidence and witness statements, and his reputation for fair but firm sentencing was well known throughout the legal community. Marcus had spent the months in jail, reflecting on his actions and their consequences. James, Whitmore had worked tirelessly to present the best possible case, focusing on Marcus's previously clean record and his growing understanding of the severity of his actions. "Your Honor," James addressed the court, "my client has used his time in custody to genuinely reflect on his behavior. He has written a detailed letter of apology to Guard Hayes and has expressed his willingness to make financial amends for the harm he has caused." The letter Marcus had written was indeed heartfelt, the product of months of genuine soul-searching. In it, he acknowledged the full impact of his actions, not just on William, but on both of their families and communities. He had also learned about William's background, his military service, and his dedication to duty. Crown Attorney Bradford was unmoved by the display of remorse. "Your Honor, Mr. Thompson's regret cannot undo the chemical burns suffered by Guard Hayes or restore his damaged vision. The defendant's actions were deliberate, unprovoked, and represent a serious assault on a serving member of our military." When called upon to address the court, Marcus stood slowly and looked directly at William Hayes for the first time since the attack. William's eyes met his steadily, showing neither anger nor forgiveness, just the same quiet dignity he had always displayed. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly, "I cannot adequately express my regret for my actions. I attacked a young man who was serving his country with honor because I was frustrated and angry about something that was completely trivial. Guard Hayes was doing exactly what he was supposed to do, and I assaulted him for it." Marcus paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I have spent every day of the past 3 months thinking about what I did and why I did it. I was a man who believed that success gave me the right to treat others poorly, that rules didn't apply to me because I owned a business and had money. I was wrong about everything." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "Guard Hayes didn't deserve what I did to him. No one deserves to be attacked for doing their job with honor and dignity. I have destroyed my own life, but more importantly, I caused serious harm to an innocent person and his family. I will carry the shame of that for the rest of my life." Judge Blackwood listened carefully to Marcus's statement, then reviewed his notes before beginning his sentencing remarks. "Mr. Thompson, you committed a serious assault against a member of Her Majesty's forces while he was performing his official duties. Your actions were captured on video and witnessed by dozens of people, including children." The judge's voice carried the weight of centuries of British legal tradition. Guard Hayes suffered chemical burns to his eyes and face, requiring weeks of medical treatment and causing him significant pain and trauma. The fact that his injuries were not permanently disabling does not diminish the severity of your actions. Marcus felt his knees weaken as the judge continued. "However, the court must also consider your previously clean record, your apparent genuine remorse, and your willingness to accept responsibility for your actions. Your guilty plea has saved the court time and spared Guard Hayes the ordeal of testifying about his attack." Judge Blackwood looked directly at Marcus before delivering the sentence. "Mr. Marcus Thompson, I sentence you to 3 years imprisonment. You will serve at least 18 months before being eligible for parole, and upon completion of your sentence, you will be permanently banned from entering the United Kingdom." 3 years. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he had been expecting worse. James Whitmore had warned him that the maximum sentence could have been 5 years, so 3 years with the possibility of parole after 18 months was actually better than they had hoped for. As Marcus was led away to begin serving his sentence, he caught one last glimpse of William Hayes. The young guard was speaking quietly with his parents, his composure as steady as ever. Marcus hoped that someday William would be able to return to the service he clearly loved, but he knew he would never know for certain. The international media coverage of the sentencing was extensive. News outlets around the world reported on the case as an example of how tourist behavior abroad could have serious consequences. Travel websites began featuring warnings about respecting local customs and the severe penalties for assaulting military or police personnel in foreign countries. Back in Chicago, the final chapter of Marcus's restaurant was playing out. David Chen had managed to sell the business to a local restaurant group, but for a fraction of what it had once been worth. The new owners kept most of the staff but changed everything else, including the name, to distance themselves from the scandal. It's like watching 8 years of work just disappear, David told his wife as he cleared out the last of his belongings from the office. Marcus built something really good here, and he threw it all away in 11 minutes of stupidity. The ripple effects continued to spread. Marcus's employees had found new jobs, but several had to accept lower wages. His suppliers had lost a significant customer. The landlord had to find a new tenant. Even his hot sauce recipe, once his pride and joy, had become a symbol of violence and poor judgment. William Hayes's recovery continued slowly, but steadily. 6 months after the attack, doctors cleared him to return to light duties, though he would never again be assigned to the high-profile posts at Buckingham Palace. The sensitivity to bright light that resulted from his injuries made outdoor ceremonial duties too difficult. Instead, William was transferred to an administrative role within the Guards Regiment, where his experience and dedication were valued. While he sometimes missed the pageantry of palace duty, he found satisfaction in training new recruits and sharing the lessons he had learned about duty, honor, and resilience. In a strange way, William told his father during one of their walks through Edinburgh, "The attack taught me something important about service. It's not just about standing at attention in a fancy uniform. It's about maintaining your principles even when people try to break them down." Marcus served exactly 18 months of his 3-year sentence before being granted parole. His time in prison had been a constant education in humility and consequence. He worked in the prison kitchen, attended anger management classes, and slowly learned to see himself as others saw him, rather than as he had always imagined himself to be. Upon his release, Marcus was immediately deported to the United States with a permanent ban from entering the United Kingdom. He arrived at O'Hare Airport in Chicago with no business, no restaurant, and no idea what he would do next. The man who stepped off the plane was fundamentally different from the one who had thrown hot sauce at a royal guard 21 months earlier. Marcus had lost his arrogance, his sense of entitlement, and his belief that rules didn't apply to him. What he had gained was an understanding of how his actions affected others and a commitment to spending the rest of his life trying to make amends. He never again owned a restaurant, instead taking a job as a line cook at wages he once would have considered insulting. He used his evenings to volunteer at a veterans support center, working with former military personnel who were struggling with various challenges. It was his small way of honoring the service member he had attacked and trying to give back to the military community he had wronged. Marcus never forgot those 11 minutes outside Buckingham Palace, and neither did anyone who knew the story. But while those 11 minutes had destroyed his old life, they had also taught him lessons about character, consequence, and redemption that he carried with him every day moving forward. The hot sauce attack became a cautionary tale shared in travel guides and cultural sensitivity training programs around the world. For Marcus Thompson, it became the defining moment that forced him to confront who he really was and who he wanted to become. The regret that began just 11 minutes after his attack would stay with him forever, but it also became the foundation for building a better version of himself from the ruins of his former life.